The Saint and the Silver Fish. In an ancient land where the sun beat down upon the cracked earth and the air hummed with the sound of 1,000 invisible insects, there travelled a holy man known only as the Saint. He was a figure of profound peace, with a long white beard that flowed like a silken waterfall and eyes that held a deep, knowing calm. Following him, as they always did, was a small group of his most devoted disciples, their simple robes coated in the fine, reddish dust of the road. Their journey was long and arduous. For days they had walked through a parched landscape under a relentless sun. Then, one afternoon, as if conjured by a dream, they came upon an oasis. It was a pond, so clear and blue it seemed a piece of the sky had fallen to earth. Great, waxy lotus flowers floated upon its surface, and the air around it was cool and alive with the darting of emerald-green dragonflies. But the true marvel of the pond lay beneath its surface. It was teeming with life. There were countless silverfish, their scales catching the sun like scattered diamonds as they darted and danced through the clear water. The disciples, hot and weary, sighed with relief and gratitude at the sight. They cupped their hands to drink the cool water and gazed at the beautiful fish. But their saint did something most peculiar. He waded into the shallows, bent his head, and with swift, deliberate movements began to scoop the little silverfish into his mouth. He did not swallow them, but simply held them there, his cheeks puffing out like a hamster's. 1, 2, 10, 20. Fish vanished into his mouth until he could hold no more. The disciples watched, utterly bewildered. Their master was a man of immense compassion who taught that all life was sacred. Why was he doing this? One of the younger disciples, a boy named Kavi who was more eager than wise, watched with wide eyes. This must be a test, a sacred ritual I do not yet understand. To prove my devotion, I must do as he does. Driven by this misguided loyalty, Kavi waded into the pond and began to copy his master. He scooped up a wriggling fish and with a grimace popped it into his mouth. It was a horrid, slippery sensation. Seeing Kavi's lead, the other disciples, not wanting to be found lacking in faith, hesitantly followed suit. Soon the edge of the pond was a chaotic scene of splashing and spluttering as they all filled their mouths with the terrified, flapping fish. The saint stood up, his face serene and unreadable. He looked at his followers, their cheeks bulging unnaturally, and said nothing. He simply gave a calm nod, turned, and continued his journey along the dusty track. The next part of the walk was an agony for the disciples. They walked with a comical, stiff-necked gait, their mouths uncomfortably full. They dared not speak, and they certainly dared not swallow. They trusted their master completely, but they could not fathom the reason for this strange and unpleasant task. All they knew was that he had a purpose, and their duty was to follow. After another hour of walking through the shimmering heat haze, they came upon a second body of water. But this one was a sad and sorry sight. It was a barren pool, its waters stagnant and murky, rimmed with cracked grey mud where the sun had baked it dry. There were no lotus flowers here, no dragonflies, and no birds sang in the withered trees that surrounded it. It was a place devoid of life. The saint walked to the edge of this desolate pool. He stood for a moment, looking at the dead water, and then he gently parted his lips. One by one, a stream of living, shimmering silver poured from his mouth into the pool. The fish, unharmed and full of vigor, hit the water and immediately began to swim, their lively movement sending ripples across the stagnant surface. The saint had not harmed them. He had transported them, carrying life from the place of abundance to the place of need. A gasp of amazement went through the disciples. Now they understood. It was a miracle. Eagerly, they rushed to the water's edge to perform the same wonder. But their miracle was a tragedy. Kavi, choking and gagging, spat the contents of his mouth onto the muddy bank. Out came not a cascade of living silver, but a pathetic, lifeless heap of dead fish, their scales already dull and their bodies limp. The other disciples fared no better. Their attempts produced only the sad small corpses of the creatures they had tried to save. They had copied the action, but they had utterly failed to replicate the miracle. They stood in horrified silence, staring at the grim results of their imitation. The saint turned to them, and for the first time, his voice held not just calm, but a sharp, cutting disappointment. "You foolish children," he said, his gaze sweeping over them. "You saw my action, but you did not see my understanding. You did not know the secret breathing technique, the gentle stillness of the mind required to create a sanctuary of peace within, to keep these fragile creatures alive on their journey. You knew only to copy what you saw. When you did not possess the knowledge, why did you imitate the act?" The disciples hung their heads, the hot flush of shame far more searing than the midday sun. They had followed their master's footsteps so closely that they had failed to look up and see where he was actually going. To follow a path is not to place your feet in the exact prints left by another. It is to understand the direction of the journey and the purpose of each step. True wisdom, my sons, lies not in blind mimicry, but in deep understanding. First, seek to understand. Only then should you dare to act.